great news, a VC just invested in the project I'm holding. It's weird though, the floor price pumped a little bit, but then went back to the same level. Don't people see how bullish this is? Maybe it's not bullish. How could it not be? The project is validated now. It's definitely not going to die in the bear market now if it has tens of millions of dollars of funding. Yeah, but what drives the value of your NFT? I'm a holder, I own part of the project. And what did the VCs just buy? Ownership of part of the project? And whose claim do you think is stronger between you and the VCs? Yeah, but it doesn't have to be like that. Keep watching for a way that VC-funded projects could resolve this contradiction if they wanted to. Although let's face it, most of them don't want to, and I'll tell you why at the end. Hi everyone, my name is Daniel Tenner, aka Sombat, and in these videos I use my 15 years of experience as a successful entrepreneur working with hundreds of tech startup founders to bring some clarity to Web3 and NFTs, to help both investors and founders who see the potential of this new technology. So the reason why VC investment is a mixed bag for most projects is pretty simple. If they're able to attract VC funding, that probably means those projects are high profile, and as I've said before in other videos, they tend to keep the value drivers of their NFTs really vague, because that's the only way to achieve very high floor prices at the moment. Most holders of those NFTs are encouraged, directly or indirectly, to see themselves as the co-owners of the project. But the reality is that they are not owners of anything other than the NFTs themselves, whatever that means. I don't know, man, I feel like an owner of this project. They ask me my opinion about where to take it. Yeah, and every business that isn't stupid will consult its customers as part of the market research to figure out where to go next. But that doesn't mean the customers own the business. But we have votes on key decisions. How key are those decisions really? Did you get consulted on whether to take VC funding? NFT projects are startup businesses, and ownership of startup businesses comes in only one form at the moment: shares. Now, NFTs are definitely not shares, especially if the SEC comes asking. So any perception that you're a co-owner because you own some NFTs is a delusion. Many projects happily encourage or at the very least allow that delusion, though there are some very few that do make it clear that the business that they're running is very separate from the NFT project and so has very different decision-making processes. Now, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great that founders can now raise money by selling NFTs without having to dilute company ownership right out of the gate. It's a huge improvement over traditional fundraising. But if that's the main driver for the NFT's value, you're going to have a problem every time that delusion gets punctured. Like when VCs invest, for example, and thereby remind everyone that they're not actually the owners of the project. It doesn't have to be that way though. The value of NFTs can be driven by something other than delusion. Like what? Well, I've talked about this a bit in my video about the value link, which you can see linked up here, I think. But let's dive in a little more. There are a whole lot of things that can make an NFT valuable. One popular one is the collector value. I think it's often overstated. Ancient artifacts are a niche curiosity in our society. Most of these NFTs won't really be ancient in any meaningful way, and whilst right now there are some crypto-rich people pumping up the prices of, for example, the first NFT collection to do X, I think most of those are already at their target value, or probably above, since we've just been through a bubble. Some collector items will maybe accrue nostalgic value over time, but that will take a long while, so I wouldn't count on them as investments. Collect things if you want to collect them. Don't buy virtual Pokemon cards expecting to get rich. Another way is simply to link the NFT to actual real utility connected to a useful product. If the utility scales with the product's success, then the NFT can also make a good investment. But even if it doesn't, at least it creates a natural floor for the NFT. If a subscription product costs $10 a month, then an NFT that gives free access to the same product will have a floor price, probably somewhere between $100 and $1,000 depending on the product and its popularity and how long people tend to use it for. This type of value driver should be positively impacted if the project raises VC funding, since that's likely to make the product more useful over time. What about the whole Veblen goods thing? Well, that can work for a short time, I think. A Veblen good is one which becomes more desirable the more expensive it is. Super rich status symbols like Lamborghinis and luxury watches are more desirable if they're more expensive, since they convey the wealth of the owner better. But so far, NFTs as Veblen goods have been more like fashion items than long-term luxury items. So the Veblen dynamic can provide some short-term value for a very small subset of NFTs, mostly Bored Apes and CryptoPunks, but it won't apply to most, and it's pretty unsteady in the long run. Well, I don't think my NFTs are a vaporant good or a collector item yet, and the utility isn't worth the current price, if I'm honest. That will be the case for most NFTs, and it's why most projects that have achieved high prices can't, or rather won't, fix this problem. Until they make the value drivers clear, projects rely on people dreaming that they are co-owners of some kind of successful thing in order to drive value. But as a consequence, if the project is successful enough to raise VC investment to get to the next stage, then that investment will puncture that dream. But if they clarify the value drivers of the NFT, it probably won't be worth the ridiculous floor price and won't get VC investment. I have some sympathy for project founders there because they're trapped, but it is a trap of their own making. They chose to play the hype game. They wanted the floor price to go up. Now the floor price is up and they can't figure out a reasonable way to make the NFT seem worth that much, because there isn't one. So the choice then is either to keep drumming up the hype forever, which is not sustainable, or accept a long, slow slide to a more reasonable floor price, and perhaps somewhere along the way define some real utility. Personally, my suggestion would be, if you hold an NFT and the project receives VC funding, this should make you happy if the NFT is well constructed. So if it doesn't make you happy, you might want to think very hard about whether the NFT's value is currently being propped up by delusions of ownership. If it is, then it is possible that this NFT will only go down over time as the imaginary ownership value driver disappears. High-profile projects are particularly vulnerable to this, by the way. If you'd like to hear more about why I think most of those are likely to suffer the biggest losses, probably heading down another 80 to 90% from their current bear market prices, have a look at this video I made earlier about the 3 traps that have ensnared every high-profile NFT project. GM, and good luck.